One of the harder ideas in fixed income is risk-neutral probabilities. In this video, I'd like to specifically illustrate and define what we mean by risk-neutral probabilities. I have 3 sheets or 3 steps where I'm going to do that. The first one is just a simple example of a coin toss where my objective is just to illustrate what we mean by risk-neutral probabilities. And what they are is, these are the probabilities that equate the expected discounted value to the market price of the instrument. I'll show you as simply as I can in that first sheet what that means. And then, having defined the concept, in the second sheet, I've replicated Bruce Tuckman's example in his chapter 7, where he retrieves the risk-neutral probabilities that are implied by a 1-year zero coupon bond. We'll take those risk-neutral probabilities and go to the third sheet and use them to price or value an option on that same bond, so that's a contingent claim. And then we'll see why there is some magic to these risk-neutral probabilities, because we're going to be able to use them to price the option, and we'll get a price that's necessarily equal to the price if we were to value the option with a replicating portfolio, which is something of an unambiguous value that would be indifferent to our risk preferences. So I look forward to that illustration of risk-neutral probabilities now. Before I show you Bruce Tuckman's bond example, I am going to illustrate and define what are the risk-neutral probabilities with an example that is simpler, the simplest one I could think of for this, and I hope it's a little bit more fun. But keep in mind, the whole point of this illustration is simply to show what we mean by risk-neutral probabilities. So those are going to be in the orange cells. So in this simple example, what we have is a coin toss, and I'm offering you a chance. Let's imagine I'm giving you the chance to buy this bet. And if we want to think about it in derivative terms, this is really a digital option or a binary option, and specifically it's a cash or nothing. Because what I'm offering you is the chance that at the end of one period, and to keep it super simple, we're going to assume one period is 1 year. At the end of the year, we're going to flip a coin, and if the coin comes up heads, I'm going to pay you $2. If the coin comes up tails, I'm going to pay you 0. So in derivatives, this is a cash or nothing, which is a form of binary or digital option. And it's a fair coin, so our true probabilities are 50% of a heads and 50% of a tails. We also call the true probabilities the real world probabilities. And of course here I'm just leading into their application in the binomial interest rate tree, where at each node the rate can move up with probability P and down with probability 1 minus P. So in this context, there's a binomial interest rate where these are rates, short-term rates, 6-month rates jumping up or jumping down by some basis points. But of course, it's mechanically similar to the binomial tree that we use in option pricing, where they're not rates, but they're prices. So at each node, it can be one or the other. So that's really a Bernoulli variable itself. And then if we stitch those Bernoullis together over time under an IID assumption, we have a binomial. So that's why it's a binomial interest rate tree. But the key is there, it's either an up or a down. In this case, either a heads or a tails. Now, I'm offering you that digital option. What would you pay for it? Well, we could look at the expected future value of this option, which is just the weighted average of that future payout, right? When the odds are 50-50, that's just the mean of the average of 2 and 0. It's just 1. So that's the expected future value, or mean, or weighted average, despite the fact that, of course, the $1 is not itself an outcome. There's only going to be 2 outcomes, 0 or 2. The weighted average, which will not itself happen, is 1 in the future. And then we might discount this to the present value. And here, I'm going to just assume that my risk-free rate of 3%, you can see, is with continuous compounding. The math is easier. And I get 97 cents. Now, is this the price that you would pay for this digital option. For the opportunity basically into the year, would you pay 97 cents to basically double your money or lose it all? Well, probably not. If the more risk averse you are, the less you're willing to pay. We imagine you're very risk averse. You're putting the entire amount at risk here. Then the amount you're willing to pay for this is probably significantly less than this. We could imagine a risk-seeking personality who, seeing the opportunity to double their money here, might actually pay more for that. So that would be risk-seeking, but in general in finance we assume some level of risk aversion. So the fact that I've used a risk-free rate of 3% doesn't feel right, because it's only appropriate to discount the risk-free rate when the payoff is certain. But the binomial tree, if we think about this binomial tree, by definition, it manifests uncertainty, right? It's going to go up or down. That is uncertainty. Therefore, leading us to the question is it even appropriate to use the risk-free rate of 3%? Well, let's just assume that you would only pay 85 cents for this. And you can see I've got a formula in here. That's implying a discount rate of 16.3%. Math on that is simple, right? Price compounded at the discount rate of R over T number of years, but my T is just 1 year, so just to keep it simple, I'm going to leave that out, right, equals my future value. So if I divide by price, take the natural log of both sides, then I get my discount rate. So that's all I've done here, right? I've just taken the natural log of my expected future value divided by the price, and that's the input really, whatever we're willing to pay, and I get 16.3%. So that's a way for us to look at your level of risk aversion. If you are willing to pay 85 cents for this, we could look at that and say, well, there's a 13.3% premium on top of the risk-free rate that basically you're charging as compensation for incurring the uncertainty that by definition is manifest in this binomial option tree, right? Maybe your risk aversion is even higher. Maybe you only pay 79 cents. Then the implied discount rate there is 23.6%, and you can see the risk premium, so to speak, is over 20%. Okay, so that's not the risk-neutral probabilities, but it leads us to the risk-neutral probabilities. I'll put this back to 85 cents. And the definition of the risk-neutral probabilities at this point now is pretty straightforward. These are the probabilities that equate the expected discounted value to the observed market price. Right, so this 85 cents becomes an input in a sense. Over here with the risk-neutral probabilities, right, we basically have a $2 payout or a zero payout. We have real-world probabilities, and we discount them to the expected discounted value. So with the risk-neutral probabilities, we know them, and we could solve for the expected discounted value. With risk-neutral probabilities, really, we're just using this value as an input, and we're solving for the probabilities, right? So in this case, what we're doing is we're observing a market price, 85 cents in this case. The payouts are unchanged, and now we're solving for the probabilities instead. See how it just switches what we're solving for? The 85 cents is now an input. Although I did make a step here, I generalized from you as the individual. I asked you what you would pay, and now I'm assuming that this is a market price, or what I call an observed market price. So it reflects a sort of consensus view around the value of this option. So this will fluctuate, combination of market and technical factors, but if it's 85 cents, the risk-neutral probabilities are the probabilities that we would solve for here, that if we used them, the expected discounted value would equal the observed market price. So the math on this is also simple in this case, because we know we have a $2 payout with probability of P, and we're going to have a zero payout with probability of 1 minus P, and then we're going to be discounting that at the risk-free rate. And now this time what we know is the market price. And so if we plug in here the market price or observed market price, and we this time solve for the probabilities, by definition, we're solving for the risk-neutral probabilities because we're enforcing that the expected discounted value necessarily equals the market price that we observe. Right, this zero cancels out, so that if I divide here by 2 and then multiply by e raised to the r, then over here I get my risk-neutral probability. And in fact, that's what I've got here. Right, I take my 85 cents divided by 2 multiplied by e raised to my risk-free rate, gets my risk-neutral probability. So if the market price changes, if I go to 83 cents, then my risk-neutral probabilities change, because really that's what we're solving for, to find the probabilities that equate the expected discounted value with the observed market price. And so that's where we get to the part where I think the language is maybe the most challenging part, and for some people, myself included, was the stumbling block. Why do we call them risk-neutral probabilities? Well, it's because these are the true real probabilities. This exercise over here doesn't change the fact this is a fair coin toss. But if we go over to the imaginary world, and that is a phrase that Tuckman uses in the explanation, the imaginary world. If we shifted over to imaginary world, where these probabilities actually were accurate for the coin, then we could do our expected discounted value calculation, get the 83 cents, and if we were risk neutral, right, meaning we didn't reduce it any further for risk aversion, so no risk aversion, that would be a fair price to pay for this coin or this digital option. See what I'm saying? If these probabilities apply, and if you were risk neutral, this would be the expected discounted value, which is the market price, and that's why we call them risk-neutral probabilities. Hopefully that's helpful. I think that may be the hardest part about it, is this language of risk-neutral probabilities. Okay, having done that, having defined them, we can now go to Tuckman's example. And we've done the hard part, really, by defining the risk-neutral probabilities. Now the scenario is we have a zero coupon bond with 1 year to maturity, and we're provided a very short spot rate curve here, also called zero rates. So it's slightly upward sloping, 5% and then 5.15%. We can determine the price of the zero coupon bond in the usual manner, although now I'm using Tuckman's example, so I'm discounting with semi-annual compound frequency. You'll make note of that. But my spot rate's on the zero. It's very simple to infer the theoretical bond price for these zeros. And then we're going to assume here that this $950.42 is in fact the market price. So there's no technical distortions. We're discounting at the 1 year spot does give us the correct market price for this 1 year bond. And then we have here very abbreviated binomial interest rate tree with, you can see on the left here, the real world true probabilities, 50%. This short-term rate, that's 6-month rate, starts at 5%. And then in Tuckman's model, the jump is 50 basis points with equal probabilities. So 50% probability that in 6 months, the 6-month rate jumps up to 5.5%, or 50% probability that the 6-month rate jumps down to 4.5%, right? And this 50-50 are the real world, aka true probabilities. Here, we conduct the expected discounted value exercise. Well, we only have here 3 states, 0, 1, and 2, but this is a 1 year bond. It pulls to par. So at maturity, it's simple. It's going to pull to its par of 1,000. And then here at these nodes in 6 months, we're simply discounting we're simply doing a expected discounted value, backward induction here. We're taking the $1,000 par value at 1 year and discounting at the 5.5%. And here at this node, 978, we're discounting at the 4.5%, the lower rate, so it's a higher value. And then similar, one more step in the backward induction, going back to initial value here, we're similarly taking these two nodes, weighting them by the real world probabilities, and discounting back at that 5%, which is the initial 6-month rate, giving us here an expected discounted value of this 1-year zero coupon bond of $951.82. And again, I've just implemented what's explained in Tuckman's Chapter 7 example, so the numbers do match. However, we can observe that the expected discounted value under the real-world probabilities is higher than the market price or theoretical price of this bond if we use the spot rate. Well, that's because it's analogous to the example that we just did with the coin toss. This price here doesn't really reflect any risk penalty, but the spot rate curve here that's upward sloping actually does do that. But we have a difference here. So we go over to and we go find the risk neutral probabilities, which is the same idea. Here, now we're solving for the probabilities that if we were to use these probabilities for the expected discounted value, we would get the observed market price. And so I won't do the algebra here, but it's also super simple. You can do that on your own. You can see here I'm using the observed market price to solve for here the probability of an up jump and getting the 80.1%. So by design, I've solved for probabilities that if we come back and do the expected discounted value on these forward nodes, but this time with the real probabilities, we're going to get an expected discounted value of $950.42 that, by definition of risk neutral probabilities, matches the observed market price. These continue to be the real world probabilities, but in the imaginary world, if these were the probabilities and we were not risk averse, but actually risk neutral, such that the market price could reflect the expected discounted value with these probabilities, then this is the price we'd pay for the bond. So we have the risk neutral probabilities. So what, you say? Well, the so what is that then we can go from this imaginary world back to the real world and use these to price the contingent claim, which in this case is the option on the bond, right? So that's the final step. And everything else about the 1-year zero coupon bond and the spot rate curve is the same. Now all we've done is added a 6-month option on this bond. And again, using Tuckman's prices, it has a strike price of $975. So that means that, again, it's only a 6-month option on the 1-year bond. So in 6 months, you can see in the up node here, we're going to be underwater with that option, and it's going to have a value of a payoff of 0. So I'm going to color that red. But if the 6-month rate drops down to 4.5% and the bond price goes up to $978 in 6 months, then on a strike of $975, you can see will be $3 will be the payoff on that option. And here, again, is the expected discounted value, but this time of the option, which has forward payoffs of 0 and 3, but I'm using the real world probabilities and discounting here at the 5%. And they get $1.46 again. So this is in Tuckman's explanation as well. So $1.46 would be the value of this option if we use the real world probabilities, but that would not reflect the risk aversion. So the point of this is we can come back and actually use the risk neutral probabilities. So here, notice my payoffs here are the same, 0 and 3. And now, if I discount with the risk neutral probabilities, by definition, I get a lower price here. I'd expect a lower price of 58 cents on the option, which should be pretty close to the market price. What is so cool about that is the 58 cents. And actually, in my spreadsheet and in Tuckman, but I'm not showing you here because it's a little more there are more calculations, but it's not difficult to show that there's a replicating portfolio. That is to say, a combination of a portfolio that's long the 1-year bond, short the 6-month bond, that has the exact same payoff as this option, and therefore the price of that replicating payoff, the price of that replicating portfolio, is a fair price for this option. And the replicating portfolio is a portfolio that is a no arbitrage portfolio, so we could all agree on would be a fair price. And by nature of these, by nature of the mechanics here, it's necessarily 58 cents as well. So by using the risk neutral probabilities on this option, we've computed a price that's consistent with the option's no arbitrage price, which is the price that's implied by a replicating portfolio, and therefore is somewhat agreeable regardless of your level of risk aversion. So that's the risk neutral probabilities, and that's the application here in Tuckman's example of Chapter 7. If you found the video helpful, subscribe to the channel and you'll get notified of my next video. Thank you.